The bullet missed Grace Patterson's head by less than an inch, splintering the wooden doorframe behind her as she dropped the basket of freshly washed linens onto the dusty ground of Val Verde, Texas. It was September of 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town nestled in the hill country, turning the main street into a corridor of shimmering heat and sudden violence. Grace pressed herself flat against the general store's outer wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribcage. Another shot rang out, then another, and she heard men shouting, horses screaming, the chaos of what she assumed was a bank robbery unfolding just yards away from where she stood frozen. She was 22 years old, had been living in Val Verde for 3 months, and this was the closest she had ever come to death. Her hands trembled as she clutched at the rough planks behind her, splinters digging into her palms. The world seemed to narrow to a tunnel of sound and fear. She could not move, could not think, could not breathe properly. All the confidence she had built up over the past year, all the determination that had brought her to Texas from Virginia after her father's death, evaporated in an instant. She was that frightened child again, helpless and small. Miss, you need to move." The voice cut through her paralysis, deep and urgent. Before Grace could process the words, strong hands gripped her shoulders and pulled her backward into the narrow alley between the general store and the blacksmith shop. She stumbled, nearly falling, but those same hands steadied her. "Stay down," the voice commanded, and this time she looked up to see her rescuer. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that blocked out the sun. His hat had been knocked askew in the rush to get her to safety, revealing sandy brown hair and eyes the color of creek water in summer, green with flecks of gold. Dust covered his clothes, a work shirt rolled up to reveal strong forearms, leather chaps over worn denim, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. But it was his face that caught her attention, strong-jawed and weathered by sun and wind, maybe 26 or 27 years old, with an expression of fierce concentration as he kept himself positioned between her and the street where the shooting continued. "Are you hurt?" he asked, those green eyes sweeping over her quickly, checking for injuries. Grace tried to speak, but no sound came out. She shook her head instead, still pressed against the alley wall, her whole body shaking. Another volley of gunfire erupted, closer this time, and she flinched so hard she nearly lost her balance. The cowboy, for that was clearly what he was, caught her elbow and guided her further down the alley, away from the street. "It is all right," he said, his voice gentler now. "Sheriff Dawson and his deputies have it handled. The shooting will be over soon. You are safe here." But Grace did not feel safe. She felt like the world had tilted sideways and she had no way to right herself. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that made her chest ache. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. She was dimly aware that she was having some kind of episode, that she needed to calm down, but the knowledge did nothing to stop the tide of panic rising within her. "Hey, now." The cowboy's voice seemed to come from far away. "Hey, look at me." "Can you look at me?" Grace forced her eyes to focus on his face. He had crouched down in front of her, his hands hovering near her arms but not touching, giving her space but staying close. "That is good. That is real good. Now breathe with me, all right. In through your nose." He demonstrated, taking a long, slow breath. "And out through your mouth." She tried to follow his instructions, tried to match her breathing to his, but her lungs would not cooperate. The panic was a living thing inside her, clawing at her throat, making her feel like she was drowning in air. "I cannot," she gasped. "I cannot do this. I am not strong enough. I should never have come here. I should never have thought I could make it on my own." The words spilled out of her, all the doubt and fear she had been suppressing for months. Since her father had died, leaving her alone in the world with barely enough money to survive, she had tried so hard to be brave. She had sold everything, used what little remained to buy a ticket west, found work as a seamstress here in Val Verde, convinced herself that she could build a new life. But she had been fooling herself. She was weak, fragile. One gunshot and she had fallen apart completely. "Miss, you listen to me." The cowboy's voice was firm now, cutting through her spiral of self-recrimination. "You are in shock. That is all this is. Someone nearly shot you, and your body is doing what bodies do when they get scared. It does not mean you are weak. It means you are human." Grace wanted to believe him, but the shame was overwhelming. She was making a fool of herself in front of a complete stranger, falling apart when she should be composed and capable. Her mother would have been horrified. A lady maintains her dignity in all circumstances, her mother had always said. But Grace had never felt less dignified in her life. The gunfire in the street finally stopped. Voices shouted back and forth, though Grace could not make out the words. The cowboy glanced toward the mouth of the alley, then back at her. "It is over now," he said. "The danger has passed, but I am not going anywhere until I know you are all right. So why do not we just sit here for a minute and you can tell me your name? I am Ben Owens. Most folks call me Ben." "Grace Patterson," she whispered. Her breathing was starting to slow, though her hands still trembled. "I work at Mrs. Henderson's dress shop." "I have seen you there," Ben said, settling into a more comfortable position on the ground, apparently unconcerned about the dust on his clothes. "You made a shirt for my friend Charlie last month. He said it was the finest stitching he had ever seen." Grace managed a weak nod. She remembered the order, a wedding shirt for a young ranch hand. She had spent hours on the embroidery, pouring all her focus into making it perfect. Sewing was the one thing she was truly good at, the one skill her mother had made sure she mastered. "I am sorry you had to see me like this," she said quietly. "I am not usually so pathetic." Ben's expression shifted, something almost like anger flashing across his face. "You are not pathetic. Do not ever say that about yourself. You know what I see when I look at you. I see a woman who got shot at and survived. I see someone who is still here, still breathing, still fighting even when she is scared. That takes strength, Miss Patterson. More strength than most people have." Grace met his eyes, searching for signs of pity or mockery, but found only sincerity. It unsettled her, this stranger's fierce insistence on her worth. She did not know how to respond to it. "I have been here 3 months, she found herself saying. "I thought I was doing well. I have a room at Mrs. Walsh's boarding house, steady work, even started to make a few friends. But now I feel like I am right back where I started, scared and alone and completely out of my depth." "3 months," Ben repeated. "You came here alone. From where?" "Virginia. Richmond. After my father died, there was nothing left for me there. Debt collectors took everything we had. A friend told me there were opportunities out west for people willing to work hard. I thought I could make a fresh start." She had never told anyone this story, not in full. Mrs. Henderson knew she was from Virginia and that she was alone, but Grace had been careful to keep the details vague. She did not want people's pity, but something about Ben Owens, about the way he had pulled her to safety and then stayed with her, made the words come easier. "That took courage," Ben said. "More courage than you are giving yourself credit for. You left everything you knew and traveled halfway across the country by yourself. You found work, found a place to live, built a life. That is not weakness, Miss Patterson. That is about the strongest thing a person can do." Grace felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She would not cry in front of this man, not after already humiliating herself so thoroughly. But his words had found some tender place inside her, some part of her that desperately wanted to believe she was more than the scared, useless creature she felt like in this moment. "I did not feel strong just now," she said. "I felt like I was going to die." "Fear does not make you weak," Ben said. "It makes you smart. Only a fool would not be afraid when bullets start flying. The measure of strength is not whether you feel fear. It is what you do in spite of it." Before Grace could respond, a figure appeared at the mouth of the alley. A man in his 50s wearing a sheriff's badge, his face grim and dusty. "Ben, you all right back here?" the sheriff called. "Fine, Sheriff Dawson. Just making sure Miss Patterson was not hit by any stray shots." The sheriff nodded. "We got 2 of them. The third one got away, but we will track him down. Nobody else got hurt, thank the Lord. You should probably get Miss Patterson home, make sure she has someone to look after her for a bit. That was a close call." Ben stood, then offered Grace his hand. She hesitated for just a moment before taking it, letting him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady and she swayed slightly. Ben's hand moved to her elbow, steadying her. "Where is Mrs. Walsh's boarding house?" he asked. "You do not have to escort me," Grace said quickly. "I am sure you have other things to do. I will be fine." "Humor me," Ben said, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice now. "I would like to make sure you actually make it home without collapsing in the street. Besides, I am headed that direction anyway." Grace wanted to argue, but the truth was she was not entirely sure her legs would carry her the 3 blocks to the boarding house without giving out. So she nodded, and they made their way out of the alley together. The main street of Val Verde was crowded now, people emerging from buildings to see what had happened, to gossip and exclaim over the excitement. Grace saw the bodies of 2 men lying in the dust outside the bank, sheets already being draped over them. She looked away quickly, her stomach turning. "Do not look," Ben said quietly, angling himself so his body blocked her view. "Just keep walking." They moved through the crowd, and Grace was intensely aware of people staring at her. Mrs. Henderson rushed over, her round face creased with worry. "Grace." "Oh, my dear girl, I saw you out here when the shooting started. Are you hurt?" "She is fine," Ben answered before Grace could. "Just shaken up. I am taking her home." Mrs. Henderson looked between them, her expression shifting to something speculative. "Mr. Owens, how fortunate that you were nearby. Grace, you take the rest of the day off. Come back tomorrow when you are feeling better." Grace managed to thank her, and they continued on. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted white, with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. Walsh, a stern-faced widow in her 60s, was standing on the porch with several other boarders. "Miss Patterson," she said as they approached, "we heard the shooting. Are you well?" "Yes, madam. Mr. Owens was kind enough to make sure I got home safely." Mrs. Walsh's sharp eyes took in Grace's pale face, her trembling hands, Ben's protective stance. "Come inside. I will make you some tea, Mr. Owens. Would you like to join us?" Ben glanced at Grace, clearly waiting for her permission. She found herself nodding, not quite ready to be alone yet despite her embarrassment. They went inside, into the boarding house's neat parlor with its threadbare but clean furniture and lace curtains. Mrs. Walsh disappeared into the kitchen while Grace sank onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. Ben remained standing, his hat in his hands now, looking around the room with the slightly awkward expression of a man unused to polite parlors. Grace studied him more carefully now that the immediate danger had passed. He was handsome in a rough way, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, the kind of man who made his living outdoors. There was a kindness in his face, though, in the lines around his eyes and the set of his mouth that made her feel safe. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did, for pulling me out of the way and staying with me. You did not have to do any of that. Yes, I did, Ben said simply. I could not have lived with myself if something had happened to you when I could have prevented it. Mrs. Walsh returned with a tea tray, and they sat in slightly awkward silence for a few moments, sipping from delicate china cups. Ben looked distinctly uncomfortable, like he was afraid he might break something. Grace found herself almost smiling at the sight despite everything. "You work at one of the ranches nearby?" she asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because she genuinely wanted to know more about him. "The Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of town," Ben said. "I have been there for 4 years now. Good work, good people. The owner, Mr. Reynolds, treats his hands fair." "He has a horse ranch, does he not?" Mrs. Walsh interjected. "I have heard he raises some of the finest horses in Texas." "Yes, madam. We do both cattle and horses, but the horses are our specialty. Mr. Reynolds has a gift for breeding. We sell to the cavalry, to ranchers, even had some buyers come all the way from California last year." Grace watched Ben's face as he talked about the ranch. He lit up in a way that told her he truly loved his work. There was pride there, but also contentment, the kind that came from knowing your place in the world. "You train the horses?" she asked. "Some of them. That is more Charlie's specialty. He is the one I mentioned earlier. But I help out when needed. Mostly I handle the day-to-day running of the cattle operation, making sure fences are mended, stock moved between pastures, that sort of thing." They talked for a while longer about the ranch, about Val Verde, about nothing of real consequence. But Grace felt herself relaxing, the terror of the afternoon fading into something more manageable. Ben had an easy way about him, no fancy words or pretensions, just honest conversation. It was refreshing after years of her mother's obsession with social niceties and saying the right thing to the right people. Eventually Ben stood, setting his cup down carefully on the tray. "I should let you rest, Miss Patterson. You have had quite a day." Grace rose as well, suddenly not wanting him to leave. "Will you be in town again soon?" The question came out more eagerly than she had intended, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. But Ben just smiled, that warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I come in most Saturdays for supplies, and I will probably stop by Mrs. Henderson's shop to check on you if that is all right, just to make sure you are doing well." "I would like that," Grace said softly. Ben settled his hat back on his head, tipped it politely to both Grace and Mrs. Walsh, and headed for the door. Grace followed him out onto the porch, wanting to say something more but not knowing what. "Miss Patterson," Ben said, turning to face her. "I meant what I said earlier. You are stronger than you know. What happened today, that panic you felt, it does not define you. How you move forward from it, that is what matters, and I have a feeling you are going to do just fine." Grace wanted to believe him so badly it ached. "How can you be sure?" "Because you are still here," he said simply. "You could have given up after your father died. Could have married someone you did not love just for security. Could have done 100 other things. But instead you chose to build your own life, on your own terms. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He left before she could respond, mounting a handsome bay horse that had been tied to the hitching post and riding off down the street. Grace stood on the porch watching until he disappeared from view, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Grace returned to work at Mrs. Henderson's shop, falling back into the familiar rhythm of measuring and cutting and stitching. She did not mention the shooting unless someone brought it up first, and she certainly did not mention her breakdown in the alley. But she thought about it constantly, and more specifically, she thought about Ben Owens. She had never had much interest in romance. Her mother had pushed her toward various suitable young men back in Richmond, sons of business associates or friends of the family. but Grace had always found them boring or arrogant or both. After her father's financial troubles came to light and the family's social standing crumbled, those same young men had vanished like smoke, proving they had only ever been interested in her father's money and connections anyway. But Ben was different. He had helped her not because of what she could offer him, not because he wanted something from her, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And he had stayed with her, talked her through her panic, treated her with a respect and kindness she had not known she was missing. Saturday came, and Grace found herself watching the shop door more than usual, glancing up every time the bell chimed. Mrs. Henderson noticed and gave her knowing looks but did not say anything. It was mid-afternoon when Ben finally appeared, looking freshly scrubbed and wearing a clean shirt, though his work boots and chaps showed he had ridden straight from the ranch. "Miss Patterson," he said, removing his hat. "Mrs. Henderson, I hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Owens," Mrs. Henderson said cheerfully. "Grace, why do not you show Mr. Owens that new fabric we got in from Dallas? I am sure he would be interested." Grace shot her employer a look that clearly said she knew what Mrs. Henderson was doing, but she came out from behind the counter anyway. "How have you been?" she asked Ben. "Well enough. Busy week at the ranch. We had a mare foal, which is always exciting. How about you? Any more trouble?" "No, thank goodness. Everything has been quiet. I am feeling much better." They stood awkwardly for a moment, and Grace became aware that Mrs. Henderson was watching them with barely concealed amusement from across the shop. She felt a flash of irritation at being the subject of gossip, but it faded when she looked back at Ben and saw the genuine concern in his eyes. "I was thinking," Ben said, turning his hat in his hands, "if you are not busy tomorrow, maybe you would like to go for a ride. I could show you some of the country around here. It is real pretty this time of year, and the weather is finally starting to cool down." Grace's heart leaped, but old habits of propriety made her hesitate. "I am not sure that would be appropriate. People might talk." "Let them," Ben said with a shrug, "but if it makes you feel better, we can have a chaperone. Charlie's wife Rosa, she is lovely, and she has been wanting to explore more of the area. We could make it a group outing." The offer was considerate, taking her concerns seriously while still making it clear he wanted to spend time with her. Grace found herself smiling. "That sounds nice." "What time?" "I will pick you up at 10 if that works. We can pack a lunch, make a day of it." Grace agreed, and after a few more minutes of conversation, Ben left. Mrs. Henderson immediately bustled over, her eyes sparkling. "That is a good man, Grace. One of the best. If he is showing interest in you, you could do a lot worse." "We barely know each other," Grace protested, but she could not stop smiling. "Sometimes you just know," Mrs. Henderson said wisely. "I knew with my Henry the first time we met. Been married 42 years before the Lord took him home. When it is right, you feel it in your bones." Grace went home that evening in a state of nervous anticipation. She spent far too long deciding what to wear, settling finally on a practical split riding skirt and a simple blouse, both in shades of blue that brought out the color of her eyes. She braided her honey blonde hair carefully and tried not to think too hard about why she cared so much about her appearance. Sunday morning dawned clear and beautiful, the September heat starting to give way to the first hints of autumn. Grace was ready and waiting on the porch when Ben arrived in a small wagon, a pretty dark-haired woman sitting beside him, and a younger man with a friendly face riding alongside on horseback. "Miss Patterson, this is Charlie and Rosa Santos," Ben said as he helped Grace into the wagon. "Charlie is the one I told you about, the horse trainer. They got married last spring." "It is nice to meet you," Grace said, settling onto the bench seat. Rosa smiled at her warmly. "Ben has told us so much about you," Rosa said. "I am glad you could join us today." It is nice to have another woman along. These two will talk about horses and cattle all day if we let them." Grace laughed, feeling some of her nervousness fade. Rosa had an open, friendly manner that put her at ease immediately. As they rode out of town, heading north toward the open country, the two women fell into easy conversation. Rosa was 20 years old, originally from San Antonio, and she had met Charlie when he had come through with a herd of horses to sell. They had courted for 6 months before marrying, and she had moved to Val Verde to be with him. "It was hard at first, leaving my family," Rosa admitted, "but Charlie is worth it, and I've come to love it here. The people are good, and the land is beautiful once you get used to how different it is from the city." "I am still getting used to it myself," Grace confessed. "Some days I miss Virginia terribly, but then I remember how trapped I felt there, like my whole life was already decided for me. Here, I feel like I can breathe." They rode for about an hour, following a rough trail that wound through rocky hills dotted with scrub oak and juniper. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, with views that stretched for miles. Charlie pointed out various landmarks, telling stories about the area's history, while Ben drove the wagon with easy competence, occasionally joining in the conversation. Grace found herself watching him more than she should, noticing the way the sun brought out red highlights in his brown hair, the strength in his hands as he held the reins, the laugh lines around his eyes when Charlie said something funny. She had never felt this kind of immediate attraction before, this pull toward another person that seemed to bypass all rational thought. They stopped for lunch near a spring-fed creek lined with cottonwood trees, spreading blankets in the shade. Rosa had packed enough food for a small army: fried chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a spice cake that made Grace's mouth water. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily, and Grace realized she had not felt this relaxed, this genuinely happy in longer than she could remember. After lunch, Charlie and Rosa wandered off to explore the creek, leaving Ben and Grace sitting on the blanket together. It should have been awkward, but somehow it was not. Ben stretched out on his back, his hands behind his head, staring up at the leaves moving in the breeze. "What made you want to be a rancher?" Grace asked. "It is the only life I have ever known," Ben said. "My pa worked ranches all over Texas. We moved around a lot when I was growing up, following the work. He taught me everything he knew about cattle and horses. He died when I was 18, and I have been on my own since then. The Double R was the first place that felt like home." "Do you have other family?" "A sister, married and living in Austin. We write sometimes, but we are not close. Ma died when I was 12. What about you?" "You mentioned your father passed, but do you have other family?" Grace shook her head. "I was an only child. My mother died when I was 16. It was just father and me after that until he got sick last year. Heart trouble. He went into debt trying to pay for doctors, but nothing helped. When he died, I found out there was nothing left. Less than nothing, actually. The house, the furniture, everything had to be sold to pay creditors." "I am sorry," Ben said, and she could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. "That must have been hard." It was. But in some ways it was also freeing. "My whole life, there were so many expectations. How to dress, how to behave, who to talk to, who to marry. My mother especially was obsessed with maintaining appearances, with making sure I was the perfect example of a Southern lady. After she died, father was more lenient, but the weight of all those expectations was still there. When everything fell apart, when I had nothing left, I realized I could finally choose my own path. And you chose to come here." "I chose to come here," Grace confirmed. "Even though it terrified me. Even though I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I could not stay in Richmond. could not become one of those women who marries for security and spends the rest of her life regretting it. Ben rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look at her. "You know what I think. I think you are one of the bravest people I have ever met." Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am not brave. You saw me fall apart after the shooting. That was not bravery." "Yes, it was. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Grace. It is feeling that fear and doing what needs to be done anyway. You have been doing that since you got here. You are doing it every single day." The way he said her name, with such warmth and certainty, made something flutter in her chest. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Grace felt the air between them thicken with unspoken possibility. Ben reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers were rough with calluses but gentle, and the touch sent a shiver through her. "I know we have not known each other long," Ben said quietly, "but I would like to keep seeing you, to court you properly if you will let me." Grace's breath caught. This was happening so fast, too fast by any reasonable standard. They had only met a week ago. She barely knew him. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something that called to a part of her she had not known existed: safety, understanding, a chance at something real. "I would like that too," she whispered. Ben's face lit up with a smile that transformed him from handsome to beautiful. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers, and they sat like that in comfortable silence until Charlie and Roser returned, both of them grinning when they saw the clasped hands. The ride back to town seemed shorter than the ride out, full of laughter and easy conversation. When they reached Mrs. Walsh's boarding house, Ben helped Grace down from the wagon with obvious reluctance to let her go. "Can I see you next Sunday?" he asked. "We could go to church together, maybe have lunch after." "I would love that," Grace said. Over the following weeks, Ben courted Grace with a steadiness and sincerity that won over even Mrs. Walsh's stern demeanor. He came to town every Saturday, sometimes just to walk with Grace through the streets of Val Verde, sometimes to bring her small gifts: wildflowers, a carved wooden bird, a length of ribbon in a shade of green that matched her eyes. They spent Sundays together, attending the small church on the edge of town, and then stealing whatever hours they could before Ben had to return to the ranch. Grace learned more about him with each meeting. He was thoughtful and deliberate, not given to rash decisions or empty flattery. He worked hard and took pride in doing things right. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides ached. He was kind to everyone, from the wealthy ranch owner to the poorest ranch hand, treating all people with equal respect. And he continued to insist she was strong, even when she doubted herself. When a drunk cowboy got rowdy outside the dress shop one afternoon and Grace froze up, unable to move or speak, Ben was there within minutes. He dealt with the situation calmly, getting the man to move along without violence, and then turned to Grace with understanding rather than judgment. "It is all right to be scared," he said. "The shooting affected you more than you want to admit. That is nothing to be ashamed of." "I feel broken," Grace confessed. "Like something inside me cracked that day and I do not know how to fix it." "You are not broken," Ben said firmly. "You are healing. That takes time, but you are still showing up, still living your life, still facing your fears. That is strength, Grace. That is you being stronger than you think you are." Grace wanted desperately to believe him, but the fear had become a constant companion, lurking at the edges of her mind. Loud noises made her jump. Unexpected movements made her heart race. She tried to hide it, tried to push through, but it was exhausting. Some days she wondered if she would ever feel truly safe again. As October arrived and the weather cooled further, Ben asked if Grace would like to visit the Double R Ranch. "I want you to see where I work, meet Mr. Reynolds and the rest of the hands. And I think you would love the horses. We have some new foals that are about the most adorable things you have ever seen." Grace agreed, though she was nervous about meeting so many new people at once. Ben picked her up early on a Sunday morning, and they rode out to the ranch in the wagon. The Double R was impressive, with a sprawling main house, several barns and outbuildings, and corrals filled with beautiful horses. Mr. Reynolds turned out to be a weathered man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a welcoming smile. "So you are the young lady who has got Ben walking around like he is floating on clouds," Mr. Reynolds said, shaking Grace's hand. "He has talked about nothing but you for weeks." "I was starting to think you were a figment of his imagination." "She is very real, sir," Ben said, his ears turning slightly red. "And you are embarrassing me." "Good," Mr. Reynolds said with a laugh. "You are too serious most of the time, Ben. It is nice to see you happy." They spent the day at the ranch, and Grace was charmed by everything she saw. The horses were indeed beautiful, sleek and well cared for, and the foals were adorable, all legs and curiosity. Ben introduced her to the other ranch hands, about a dozen men ranging from teenagers to grizzled veterans in their 50s. They all treated her with friendly respect, and several made pointed comments about Ben needing to hold on to her. Charlie and Rosa were there as well, and Rosa showed Grace around the small house she and Charlie shared on the ranch property. It was simple but cozy, and Grace felt a pang of longing looking at it. This was what a real home looked like, a place built on love and partnership rather than obligation and appearance. "Ben built most of the furniture," Rosa said, running her hand over a beautifully crafted table. "He is good with his hands, makes things that last." Charlie says Ben could have been a carpenter if he had wanted, but he loves ranch work too much. Grace studied the table, noticing the careful joinery, the smooth finish. It spoke of patience and skill, the same qualities she saw in Ben himself. She found herself imagining a house like this one, simple and sturdy, a place where she and Ben could build a life together. The thought should have scared her, should have felt too big and too fast, but instead it felt right. That evening, as Ben drove her back to town, Grace found the courage to voice something that had been weighing on her mind. "Ben, can I ask you something? Anything?" "Why me? I mean, you could court any woman in Val Verde. Women far prettier than me, far more accomplished without all my fears and weaknesses. Why choose me?" Ben was quiet for a moment, and Grace immediately regretted asking. But then he pulled the wagon to a stop at a small overlook that gave a view of the valley below, the lights of Val Verde just beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" he asked. Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. "I see a woman who lost everything and chose to start over rather than give up. I see someone who works hard, who takes pride in her craft, who treats people with kindness even when she is struggling herself. I see courage and determination wrapped up in this idea that she is somehow not enough. And that breaks my heart, Grace, because you are more than enough. You are everything." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks before she could stop them. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such conviction and tenderness. Ben pulled out a handkerchief and gently wiped the tears away. "You have been told your whole life that you have to be perfect," he continued. "That you have to hide any weakness, any fear, any flaw, but I do not want perfect. I want real. I want you exactly as you are. Your fears do not make you less in my eyes. They make you human. And watching you face them, watching you keep going even when you are scared, that is what made me fall in love with you." Grace's breath caught. "You love me." "I do," Ben said simply. I know it is soon, maybe too soon, but I cannot help what I feel. You do not have to say anything back. I just wanted you to know. Grace looked at this man who had appeared in her life like a miracle, who had quite literally pulled her to safety and then stayed to help her find her footing. She thought about all the ways he had shown her kindness and patience, all the times he had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. "I love you too," she said, and the words felt like freedom. "I think I started falling in love with you in that alley, when you made me breathe and told me I was stronger than I knew." Ben cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was Grace's first real kiss, and it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I want to marry you," Ben said. "I know we should wait longer, do things properly, but I am not good at playing games or hiding what I want. I want to build a life with you, Grace. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to face whatever comes our way together. Will you marry me?" Grace knew she should probably ask for more time, should be cautious and sensible. But she had spent most of her life being cautious, and where had it gotten her? Alone and afraid. Ben was offering her something different, a partnership built on honesty and respect, a chance to be truly known and loved anyway. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They kissed again, longer this time, and Grace felt like she was flying. Everything was happening so fast, but it felt right in a way nothing else ever had. When they finally made it back to the boarding house, it was full dark, and Mrs. Walsh was waiting on the porch with a knowing expression. "I suspect you two have some news," she said. "We are getting married," Grace said, unable to keep the joy out of her voice. Mrs. Walsh smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her stern face. "I am happy for you, child. Mr. Owens is a good man. You will have a good life together." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning. They decided on a simple wedding in the Val Verde Church, scheduled for early November. Mrs. Henderson insisted on making Grace's wedding dress as a gift, and Rosa enthusiastically threw herself into helping with preparations. Mr. Reynolds offered to host the reception at the ranch, and before Grace quite knew what was happening, the whole thing had taken on a life of its own. But even in the midst of all the excitement, Grace's fears continued to plague her. She had nightmares about the shooting, waking up in a cold sweat with her heart pounding. Loud noises still made her panic. She tried to hide it, not wanting to worry Ben, but he noticed anyway. He always noticed. "Talk to me," he said one Sunday afternoon as they sat by the creek where they had had their first picnic. "I can see something is bothering you." Grace hesitated, then decided honesty was the only way forward. "I am scared that I am making a mistake." "Not about you," she added quickly, seeing the flash of hurt in his eyes. "But about me. What if I am not strong enough to be a ranch wife? What if I fall apart the first time something goes wrong? You deserve someone who can stand beside you, not someone who panics at the slightest trouble." Ben took both her hands in his expression serious. "Grace, I need you to understand something. Strength is not about never being afraid. It is not about never breaking down or needing help. Strength is about getting back up when life knocks you down. It is about asking for help when you need it. It is about facing your fears even when they feel overwhelming." "But I do not feel strong," Grace said, her voice breaking. "I feel weak and scared and completely inadequate." "Then let me tell you a story," Ben said. "When I was 19, I got thrown from a horse. Landed wrong, broke my arm in 2 places. It hurt like nothing I had ever felt before, and for months after it healed, I was terrified to get back on a horse. I would break out in a cold sweat just thinking about it. But you know what? I did it anyway. I got back on that horse because it was my job, because it was what I needed to do. And I was scared every single time for weeks. Eventually, the fear faded, but the act of doing it anyway, that was what made me strong. "What if my fear does not fade?" Grace whispered. "Then we deal with it together," Ben said. "But I think it will, Grace. I think you are already stronger than you were a month ago, and you will be even stronger a month from now. Healing takes time, and I will be right there beside you the whole way." Grace leaned into him, letting him hold her while she cried. It was both comforting and terrifying, this vulnerability, but Ben never flinched from it. He just held her and let her feel what she needed to feel. The wedding day arrived on a crisp November morning, with the kind of clear blue sky that seemed to stretch on forever. Grace stood in the small back room of the church, looking at herself in the mirror and trying to calm her nerves. The dress Mrs. Henderson had made was beautiful, simple white cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, fitted perfectly to Grace's slender frame. Rosa had woven wildflowers into Grace's hair, and she looked like someone from a fairy tale, pretty and hopeful and young. "You look beautiful," Rosa said, adjusting the flowers one more time. "Ben is going to lose his mind when he sees you." "I am terrified," Grace admitted. "Not of marrying Ben, but of everything else. What if I cannot do this? What if I am not cut out for ranch life?" "Then you will learn," Rosa said firmly. "Just like I did. Just like every woman who has ever married and moved somewhere new. You are not alone in this, Grace. You have Ben, and you have me, and you have a whole community of people who care about you. You are going to be fine." The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Grace remembered walking down the aisle on Mr. Reynolds's arm, since she had no family of her own. She remembered the way Ben's face lit up when he saw her, the way his hands trembled slightly as he took hers. She remembered saying her vows, meaning every word, promising to love and honor this man for the rest of her life. And she remembered the kiss, sweet and tender and full of promise, that sealed them together as husband and wife. The reception at the ranch was lively and joyful, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Grace danced with Ben, with Mr. Reynolds, with Charlie and several of the other ranch hands. She laughed and talked and felt, for the first time in months, truly happy. The fear was still there, lurking at the edges of her consciousness, but it seemed smaller somehow, less overwhelming. When the sun set and the guests began to drift away, Ben took Grace's hand and led her to a small house on the edge of the ranch property. It was similar to Charlie and Rosa's place, but slightly larger, with a bedroom, a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a small porch facing the western hills. "Mr. Reynolds gave us this house as a wedding present," Ben said, opening the door and carrying Grace over the threshold. "It has been empty for a few years, but I have been fixing it up over the past month. It is not fancy, but it is ours." Grace looked around at the simple but well-made furniture, recognizing Ben's handiwork in every piece. There were curtains on the windows, a quilt on the bed, dishes in the cupboard. He had thought of everything, had prepared this space with such care and attention. She felt tears prick at her eyes again, overwhelmed by the tangible evidence of his love. "It is perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." That night, Grace gave herself to her husband with both nervousness and trust. Ben was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when she lay in his arms afterward, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek, Grace felt something inside her shift and settle. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she really was strong enough. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Grace had to learn to cook for two on a wood stove that had a temperament all its own, to manage a household without servants, to live in close quarters with another person. There were moments of frustration and awkwardness as they figured out how to be a couple, how to share space and decisions and lives. But there were also moments of profound joy. waking up next to Ben each morning and falling asleep in his arms each night. Learning to ride horses properly, despite her fear, because she wanted to be able to accompany him around the ranch. Making friends with the other ranch wives and realizing she had found a community, a place where she belonged. Discovering that she could be useful, using her sewing skills to mend clothes for the ranch hands and making curtains and linens for their home. Winter came to the Texas Hill Country, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that transformed the harsh landscape into something magical. Grace stood on their porch one December afternoon, wrapped in a shawl Ben had bought her, watching the snow fall. She thought about where she had been a year ago, alone and grieving in Richmond, terrified of the future. And she thought about where she was now, married to a good man, living in a place that was starting to feel like home. Ben came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about? How much has changed?" Grace said. "How different my life is now. Better or worse?" "Better," she said without hesitation. "So much better, I never knew I could be this happy." Ben pressed a kiss to her temple. "You know what I am most proud of? Not that you are here, not that you married me, but that you are facing your fears. I see you push through your anxiety every single day. I see you choosing courage even when you are scared. That is real strength, Grace. That is you being exactly who you were meant to be." Grace turned in his arms to face him. "I could not do it without you." "Yes, you could," Ben said firmly. "You were strong before you met me. I just helped you see it." In February, Grace realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. She wanted children, had always imagined being a mother, but the responsibility of it felt overwhelming. What if she failed? What if her fears and weaknesses somehow damaged her child? Ben, as always, was her steady anchor. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child is lucky to have you." "How can you be so sure?" Grace asked. "Because I know you," Ben said. "I know your heart, I know your strength, and I know that you will love this baby with everything you have. That is what matters most." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into her 4th month. The Texas heat of summer, as her belly grew larger, was almost unbearable. She felt ungainly and uncomfortable, and sometimes wondered how women had been doing this for all of human history. But through it all, Ben was there, patient and supportive, taking on extra chores around the house and never complaining. Rosa, who had just had a baby of her own the previous spring, was a fountain of advice and encouragement. "It is worth it," she promised. "Every moment of discomfort, every fear, all of it becomes worth it the first time you hold your baby." In October, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Grace went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she was certain she could not do it, that the pain would destroy her. But the midwife, an experienced older woman named Mrs. Tucker, was calm and confident. "You are doing beautifully," Mrs. Tucker kept saying. "You are so strong. Just a little bit more." And Ben was there, holding her hand, letting her squeeze until she thought she might break his fingers, murmuring encouragement and love. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Grace felt a rush of love so intense it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Ben said, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their baby. "Grace, you did it. You were so strong." They named him Thomas after Grace's father, and he became the center of their world. Grace discovered that motherhood came more naturally than she had feared. Yes, she was tired and overwhelmed sometimes. Yes, she had moments of doubt and anxiety, but she also had deep wells of love and determination she had not known she possessed. When Tommy was 6 months old, Grace was hanging laundry outside their house when she heard gunshots from the direction of the main ranch buildings. Her first instinct was to panic, to freeze the way she had that day in Val Verde. Her heart started racing, her hands started shaking, and for a moment she was back in that terrible afternoon, hearing bullets whiz past her head. But then she heard Tommy crying inside the house, heard other women calling out in alarm, and something inside her shifted. Her child needed her. Her friends needed her. There was no time for panic. Grace ran into the house, scooped up Tommy, and then ran to the main ranch house where the other women and children were gathering. Ben and the other men were already organizing a defense, guns in hand. It turned out to be a group of bandits, 5 men who had thought the ranch would be easy pickings. They were wrong. The ranch hands fought them off with minimal injuries, and the bandits fled empty-handed. But the whole incident only lasted about 15 minutes, and when it was over, Grace realized something profound. She had been terrified, yes, but she had not frozen. She had not fallen apart. She had done what needed to be done to protect her son. Ben found her afterwards, still holding Tommy close, her whole body trembling with adrenaline. "Are you all right?" he asked, running his hands over her and the baby, checking for injuries. "I am fine," Grace said. "We are both fine. Ben, I did not freeze. I was scared, but I moved anyway. I protected our son." Ben pulled her into his arms, careful of the baby between them. "I know. I saw you running. You were incredible, Grace. You were exactly as strong as I have always known you were." Grace buried her face in his chest and cried, but this time the tears were not from fear or shame. They were tears of release, of relief, of finally understanding what Ben had been trying to tell her all along. Strength was not the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. It was loving fiercely and protecting what mattered and getting up every single day to face whatever came. "I am sorry I did not believe you," she said when she could speak again. "All those times you told me I was strong and I argued with you, you were right. You were right all along." "You had to see it for yourself," Ben said gently. "I could tell you 1,000 times, but until you felt it, until you knew it in your bones, it was just words." As the years passed, Grace continued to grow into herself, into the woman Ben had always seen when he looked at her. She and Ben had 3 more children, a daughter they named Rose, another son named Samuel, and finally another daughter they named Caroline. Their house was always full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Grace became known in Val Verde and the surrounding ranches as someone who could be counted on in a crisis. When there was sickness, she was there with soup and comfort. When there was tragedy, she was there with practical help and a listening ear. When someone needed clothes mended or altered, they came to her. She built a life that was full of purpose and connection, so different from the shallow social obligations of her youth. Ben became foreman of the Double R when Mr. Reynolds's health began to fail, a position he earned through years of hard work and loyalty. He and Grace saved their money carefully, and eventually they were able to buy a small piece of land adjacent to the ranch, building a larger house where their growing family could spread out. On their 10th anniversary, they stood together on the porch of that house, watching their children play in the yard. Tommy was 9 now, tall and serious like his father. Rose was 7, creative and kind. Samuel was 5, full of energy and mischief. And Caroline, at 2, was the baby everyone doted on. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Grace asked, leaning into Ben's side. "Best 10 years of my life," Ben said. "Though I have to admit I did not fully imagine this much chaos when I asked you to marry me." Grace laughed. "Neither did I. But I would not change a thing. Not even that first day. When you were convinced you were not strong enough, Grace thought about it, about that terrified young woman in the alley, certain she was too weak to survive the West. "Not even that," she said finally, "because it brought me to you. And you helped me find a strength I did not know I had." "You always had it," Ben said. "I just held up a mirror." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grace thought about everything that had happened since that September afternoon in 1878, when a bullet had nearly ended her life, and instead had changed it completely. She thought about all the moments of fear and doubt, all the times she had wanted to give up, all the ways she had been forced to grow. "Ben," she said softly. "Yes, love, thank you. For seeing me when I could not see myself. For believing in me when I did not believe in myself. For loving me through all of it." Ben turned her to face him, cupping her face in his calloused hands the way he had that first time he kissed her. "Grace Owens, you are the strongest person I know, and I am honored to walk through this life beside you." He kissed her then, sweet and familiar and still full of the promise they had made to each other 10 years ago. Their children noticed and groaned in the way children do when their parents show affection, but Grace just smiled against Ben's lips. She had come to Texas alone and afraid, convinced she was not strong enough to survive. But she had not just survived, she had thrived. She had built a life beyond her wildest dreams, full of love and purpose and belonging. And she had discovered that strength was not something you either had or did not have. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, supported by people who believed in you even when you could not believe in yourself. Years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. Mr. Reynolds passed away peacefully in his sleep when Tommy was 12, leaving the double R to Ben in his will, a gesture of trust and affection that still brought tears to Grace's eyes when she thought about it. Running the ranch was an enormous responsibility, but Ben took to it naturally, and Grace was his partner in every decision. Tommy grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose discovered a talent for healing and began apprenticing with the town doctor, hoping to become a nurse. Samuel was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, talking about seeing the world beyond Texas. And Caroline, sweet Caroline, had inherited her mother's gift with needle and thread, creating beautiful embroidery that people came from miles around to commission. When Grace was 42 and Ben was 46, they became grandparents for the first time. Tommy married a lovely young woman named Alice, and they had a baby boy they named Benjamin, after his grandfather. Holding that tiny baby, seeing Tommy's face full of the same wonder and fear Ben had shown when their children were born, Grace felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. "Now you know what I felt," Ben said, watching Grace rock their grandson. "Watching you with our children, seeing you be the mother I knew you would be. I was so scared," Grace remembered, "so convinced I would fail. But you did not fail. You never fail, Grace. You just keep showing up, keep trying, keep loving. That is your real strength. Not that you never struggle, but that you never give up." Grace looked at her husband, this man who had pulled her from danger all those years ago, and then spent their entire marriage pulling her toward her own potential. His hair was more silver than brown now, his face lined by years of sun and wind and laughter. But his eyes were the same, still that beautiful creek water green, still looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," she said. "More now than even on the day we married." "And I love you," Ben replied, "more with every passing year." They rocked baby Benjamin together, and Grace thought about the speech Ben had given her that very first day, about fear not being weakness, about strength being found in getting back up when life knocks you down. She had lived those words for more than 20 years now, had proved them true over and over again. And now she would get to watch her children and grandchildren learn the same lessons, find their own strength, build their own lives. Grace's last decades were full and rich. She saw all her children marry and have families of their own. She and Ben grew old together on the ranch they had built into one of the finest in Texas. She taught her daughters and granddaughters to sew, passing on the skill that had saved her life by giving her a way to support herself when she had nothing. She told her grandchildren stories about coming west as a frightened young woman, about meeting their grandfather, about learning that strength comes in many forms. When Ben died at 71, peacefully in his sleep after a full day of work on the ranch he loved, Grace thought the grief might destroy her. They had been married for 44 years, had built an entire world together. How was she supposed to exist without him? But even in her grief, she found she had strength. Not because the pain was not real, not because she did not miss him desperately, but because she carried within her everything he had taught her, every moment of love and encouragement and belief. She had 4 children and 14 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren who needed her. She had a ranch to help run and a community that depended on her. She had a life that still had purpose and meaning. On what would have been their 45th anniversary, Grace rode out alone to the creek where they had shared that first picnic, where Ben had told her he loved her and asked her to marry him. She sat on the bank, letting the sound of water over stone soothe her aching heart, and she talked to him as if he were still there. "You were right about everything," she said. "About me being stronger than I knew, about fear not being weakness, about getting back up when life knocks you down. You spent our whole marriage teaching me those lessons, and now I have to live them without you here to remind me. But I will do it, Ben. I will keep going, keep loving, keep being strong. Because that is what you taught me. That is what you gave me." Grace lived another 12 years after Ben's death, active and engaged until the very end. She passed away at 84, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, slipping away peacefully in her sleep. They buried her next to Ben on a hill overlooking the Double R Ranch, under a spreading oak tree they had planted together 50 years before. At her funeral, Tommy stood up to speak about his mother. He was 63 years old, a grandfather himself, and his voice was thick with emotion as he addressed the crowd of family and friends who had come to pay their respects. "My mother was the strongest person I ever knew," he began. "Not because she never struggled, not because she was never afraid, but because she kept going anyway. She came to Texas with nothing but courage and determination. She met my father, and together they built something beautiful. She raised 4 children, welcomed countless grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and touched more lives than I can count. But if you asked her, she would have told you she started out weak, that she did not think she could survive in the West. My father saw something in her that she could not see in herself, and he spent his whole life helping her find it. That is what real love looks like. That is what real strength looks like. And that is the legacy my mother leaves behind for all of us who loved her. The knowledge that we are stronger than we know, that fear is not weakness, and that love can help us become who we were always meant to be." After the funeral, Tommy's daughter Sarah found an old wooden box tucked away in Grace's closet. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Ben's distinctive handwriting. They were addressed to Grace, written throughout their marriage, small notes of love and encouragement. Sarah read through them with tears streaming down her face, seeing the evidence of her grandfather's devotion. The way he had consistently told Grace she was strong and capable and brave. But at the very bottom of the box, Sarah found something else. A letter in Grace's handwriting, sealed in an envelope marked "To my children and grandchildren." Sarah gathered her family together and opened it, reading aloud. "My dearest family, if you are reading this, then I have gone to be with your father and grandfather. I want you to know that I lived a life beyond my wildest dreams, full of love and purpose and joy. But it almost did not happen. When I came to Texas, I was convinced I was too weak to survive, too fragile for the harsh realities of frontier life. Then I met your grandfather, and he saw something in me I could not see in myself. He saw strength where I saw weakness, courage where I saw fear, potential where I saw limitation. He spent our entire marriage reflecting back to me the person he knew I could become, until finally I believed it too. I want each of you to know that you have that same strength within you. Life will knock you down. You will face challenges that feel impossible. You will doubt yourself and your abilities. But I am here to tell you from the other side of a long and beautiful life that you are stronger than you know. Find someone who sees your potential the way your grandfather saw mine. Be that person for others. And never, ever let fear convince you that you are not enough. You are enough. You have always been enough. You just have to believe it. With all my love, Grace Patterson Owens." Sarah looked up from the letter to see her entire family in tears, 3 generations of people who carried Grace's legacy in their blood and bones. They were ranchers and healers, dreamers and builders, mothers and fathers, each of them living proof that strength could be found, nurtured, and passed down through the generations. Tommy took the letter gently from his daughter's hands, reading it again silently. He thought about his mother, that brave woman who had whispered she was not strong enough, and his father, the cowboy who had proved she was stronger than she ever knew. Their love story had shaped his entire life, had shown him what partnership and devotion looked like, had taught him that the greatest gift you can give someone is helping them see their own worth. As the family dispersed, heading back to their various homes and lives, they carried with them the story of Grace and Ben. It became a touchstone, passed down to children and grandchildren yet to come. The story of a woman who thought she was weak and a man who saw her strength. Of a love that transformed 2 lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. And in Val Verde, Texas, in the hill country where it all began, the Double R Ranch still stood, still run by Grace and Ben's descendants. The house they had built together remained at the heart of the property, lovingly maintained, a monument to what 2 people could create when they believed in each other. Visitors who came to the ranch always remarked on the photo that hung in the entryway, a formal portrait taken on Grace and Ben's 20th anniversary. In it, Grace sat in a chair with Ben standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder. They were both looking at the camera, but something in their expressions, some spark of warmth and understanding, told the viewer that these were 2 people who had found something rare and precious in each other. Grace's expression in particular drew people's attention. There was strength in her face, in the set of her jaw and the direct gaze of her eyes. But there was also softness, vulnerability, the openness of someone who had learned that true strength included the courage to be seen, to need others, to admit fear while still moving forward. It was the face of a woman who had been tested and had emerged not unscathed, but whole. And if you looked closely at the portrait, you could see Ben's hand gently squeezing Grace's shoulder, a simple gesture that somehow captured the entire essence of their relationship. Support without smothering. Encouragement without pressure. Love without condition. A cowboy helping a woman see her own strength, and in doing so, becoming the greatest love story Val Verde had ever known. The end.